I really wanted this to be good. This is the Intelligent Super Gateway Box from LinknLink. And if it lives up to the hype, it might just be the best value bit of smart home kit that money can buy. But will it live up? I don't even know what I'm meant to be reviewing. If you want to get into Home Assistant and you want to do it as easily and cheaply as possible, then you need to watch this video before you make up your mind how you're going to do so. So let's dive in and find out if this thing is any good. Hi, I'm James and I've been building out my smart home for years, with products from just about every manufacturer out there, figuring out what works and what doesn't. So, what is it? Well, it's billed primarily as a smart set-top box for your TV, but the bit we're all most interested in, of course, is the fact that it runs Home Assistant out of the box. No searching online for the correct bin file and learning how to flash it without bricking it. No faff-tastic setup required. You plug it in and it's there and ready on your network. It's meant to be a bit like what Apple have done with the Apple TV. You plug it into your TV and your network and it allows you to watch all of your favourite streaming services, but in the background, it can also quietly power your entire smart home. Except this runs Home Assistant, so it's immediately more versatile in what you can connect. And if you buy the Zigbee bundle, you can connect all manner of ridiculously cheap Zigbee sensors. And the same idea if you plug in a Z-Wave or Thread dongle. So now we know what it's supposed to do, let's open it up and see what we get inside. And here it is, the LinknLink Intelligent Super Gateway Box. You can see all of the connectivity it supports on the side there, which is a bit of a misnomer because they're mostly supported by plug-in dongles. But as you can see, we've got two USB ports for plugging those in, an Ethernet port and an HDMI port, the power jack and audio output jack, I think, which is interesting. We've got the HDMI cable in the box here as well, which is nice of them to supply, along with a US power brick, which is annoying, but I'll figure out how to plug that in, and a remote for controlling it, and some paperwork. And with that done, let's go plug it into my TV and see what the experience is really like. And it's at this point I'm kind of lost for words. I really wanted this to be good, but I don't even know what I'm meant to be reviewing. This device is advertised as an Android set-top box, which also runs Home Assistant. But the user experience is so bad, I don't know how anyone is supposed to use either. From the off, it shows me a pretty standard login form on the left of the screen, which no one's expected to use, because there's also a QR code on the right hand side to scan in the app. And I already have the LinknLink app on my device logged in and ready, so I searched in there for a place to scan the QR code and I couldn't find it anywhere. Then at some point a window popped up to add a discovered device, but the device picture didn't really match what I was expecting. But I went ahead and added it anyway, and it exposed some sensors which I also didn't really expect. So I deleted that because it didn't seem to do anything over on the TV anyway, and instead went through the painstaking process of using their supplied remote and the on-screen keyboard to enter my credentials. And this was actually made almost impossible because every press of their remote somehow triggered something on my TV. I think because they both share infrared actions or something. So I had to sit there with my TV remote in the other hand, dismissing pop-ups after every single press in order to get through and eventually enter my credentials. But I finally did it, and I got logged in and landed on this reasonably nice looking home screen. But I still couldn't really do much because navigating the UI was so broken. Now, I've seen Paul Hibbert's videos about this thing, as I'm sure all of you have, so I went and dug out a keyboard and a mouse and headed straight for the updates. And I went through and updated the system itself in the hope the navigation would get a bit less painful. And sadly, it did not. Then after updating the system and the container, whatever that is, relatively quickly and seamlessly, I got to the Home Assistant image update. And this notice really put the final nail in the coffin of this device for me already. I'm not entirely sure how readable this is ultimately going to be for you, so I'll summarize it for you. This screen is basically saying that in order to update Home Assistant on this device, you will need to perform a backup of your entire Home Assistant instance, download it to your computer, run the update, and then restore from the backup that you created before. A frankly huge amount of effort for every single update of Home Assistant, which typically come along every few weeks, at the most monthly. But that's assuming that we get every update, because it seems as though we are beholden to LinknLink to provide an updated image of Home Assistant for this device, which I'm guessing that they won't do for every incremental update. But that doesn't matter, because you wouldn't want to do every update, because they take ages. I basically sat down and wrote out my entire thoughts for this video, and then went and cooked some dinner in the time it took to update this Home Assistant image. And that is without the process of backing up and restoring a real system before and after. Bearing in mind that whilst this is happening, your entire Home Assistant setup will be out of action completely. And when it finally completed and rebooted, there was an error in connecting to its internal Home Assistant instance. And this is because you then have to log into the Home Assistant instance after each update and provide the ISG with your long-lived access token in order to regain access. And when I did this, I regained access to a fresh new Home Assistant instance, which was considered up to date, running 2025.12.2. For context, at the time of writing, the latest Home Assistant version is 2026.2.2. So there's a full 2-month difference between what the ISG thinks is up to date and reality. And that's only so far. Who knows how long it will be before we get an updated image from LinknLink. Now look, I said at the beginning that this is a set-top box that happens to run Home Assistant, so maybe all this is excusable if it's a good set-top box, but spoiler alert, it's not. At best, it's usable once you're signed into everything, but it's not really a set-top box, and I think this is the root of the problem with this device. I think what LinknLink have done is literally just taken the internals from the ISG display and popped them inside of a set-top box and thrown in a remote, and that has resulted in a frankly subpar experience. You cannot sell a user a set-top box with a remote and then tell them they need to plug in a mouse in order to do anything, which this literally does on screen midway through you trying to do anything with the remote. And I personally think that they would have been much better off billing this thing as a kind of budget Android mini PC and ditch the remote entirely, because that much more closely matches its user experience. But that still does not solve the issue of having to package up Home Assistant as an Android app for every update they release. This is just fundamentally a bad way to set up your system, because it will cause you headaches down the line, and you'll wish you'd spent the extra few quid to avoid them in the first place. Look, LinknLink are a great company and a nice bunch of people who are genuinely trying to innovate in this space, which I'm all for, but sadly, I think they've missed the mark on this one. If you really want a cheap way to get into Home Assistant, then maybe you could consider one of these as a starting point, but I personally think you will always be better off spending a few quid more and getting a Home Assistant green with a proper Home Assistant OS installation that you can easily update and generally maintain. However, with all of this said, I'm not going to be throwing mine in the bin just yet, because I did eventually manage to find a use case for it in my home. Some of you may recall that I recently did a big clear out of my loft, and in the process I came across an old monitor, which sparked the idea to set up another kiosk by my front door, mainly so that I could show my doorbell camera feed when it's been pressed, and essentially have a digital peephole. And since this device has both a Home Assistant server app and the companion app, I can use the latter to connect to an external Home Assistant instance. But of course, that isn't easy either. The issue at this stage is that it doesn't just ask you for your login credentials. It asks you for that long-lived access token that I mentioned earlier, which is theoretically easier in the long run because it saves you logging in repeatedly over time. But getting that token is a nightmare, because it's a really long string of letters which is just not reasonable to type into this thing. And since it doesn't have a camera, you can't just scan the QR code either. But I did eventually find a way. Since this thing actually has the Edge browser pre-installed, I decided I'd log into my Home Assistant instance in that, and then copy the access token into the clipboard on the device using my keyboard, so that I could then paste it into the companion app to get it logged in. But even this process became a bigger nightmare than it should have. But at least this time it wasn't entirely the fault of the device. The issue now was down to a recent Home Assistant update that broke the Kiosk extension that I was using to hide the sidebar on my dashboards. This meant that after logging in, the UI appeared totally broken, and I almost gave up completely at this point assuming its browser just failed to render it. But once I realised the issue, I disabled the extension and finally managed to log into Home Assistant via the browser, copy that access token for my actual Home Assistant instance. I then pasted that into its companion app on the device, and it still didn't work. And in all honesty, at this point, I'm not even 100% sure how I finally did it, but I eventually landed in the native settings for the Android companion app, rather than the settings screen that they've cooked up before you load the app up. And this allowed me to enter the server information in the usual way and crucially hit Activate Server on my Home Assistant server, which finally landed me on my dashboard. And since I was logging into the dedicated dashboard user I already had set up, it landed me on the dashboard I had already set up as the default for this purpose. So all that was left to do was to go and ring my doorbell and see if the camera feed popped up. And it did, but it didn't load the live feed. It briefly loads the latest snapshot, but then when trying to load the actual camera feed, it fails and just goes black. So for whatever reason, it's unable to load camera feeds from Home Assistant, making the main purpose I had for setting this thing up here null and void. But at least I have it showing my dashboard for quick glances of information until I can afford to justify another Raspberry Pi and get it working properly. All in all, this has been a pretty bad experience, I'm afraid. No feature that this device claims to support does it do particularly well. And I know you get what you pay for, but it's also not as cheap as I first thought from watching other people's videos on it. If you pay the normal non-offer price for it and convert that into English money, it comes in at the same rough price point as a Raspberry Pi 5. And okay, you might not get quite the same spec model of a Pi, but I'd rather have a slightly memory-hungry Pi without a case that I can do whatever I want with than something that is slightly more powerful, but that power is absolutely wasted because it's hamstrung by its operating system. Now, this is the part of the video where I'd usually say if you'd like to pick one up, the link will be on my website, but I'm afraid it won't be on this occasion because I can't really recommend this thing. So if you really still want to try one, go and check out LinknLink's website, I guess. And since I'm certainly not going to be making any affiliate commission on this device, do please consider supporting the channel in any way that you can using the links over on my website, homeiswherethesmart.is, and I will be eternally grateful. It's been a really busy time for me and my family recently, and hopefully that's passing now, so I can focus more on creating content that you find valuable. And speaking of that, if you did find this video valuable, please be sure to hit like and subscribe for more content like this in the near future. All that's left to say now is a huge thank you for watching, and as always, remember, home is where the smart is.